From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Baseball Show. Paul Mancano, John Meoli, and Kyle Goon joining us for a special episode on this Tuesday. We're going to discuss what the Orioles should do at the trade deadline. We'll also discuss some movement around the catcher position as the Orioles deal with a few injuries. All that and much, much more. But first, let's get a quick word from our sponsor.
For the fifth year in a row, Toyota is the best resale value brand according to Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com, including the 2025 Grand Highlander, best in resale value for midsize SUVs. Toyota, let's go places.
All right, guys, we are going to discuss what the O's should do at the deadline. We'll talk about the catcher position, the fact that the Orioles have lost not one, but two catchers to the injured list within the past week. But first, guys, Trevor Rogers. Where on your bingo card did you have Trevor Rogers having the longest and most successful start by an Orioles starter this year on June 23rd with 8 shutout innings last night?
I didn't have it on my bingo card at all. I was starting to sell that stock gently down the river. Yeah.
Mine was already sold. I think it's safe to say.
Touching what, 96 yesterday on the velocity?
Yeah, and the velocity was going up as the game was going on. John, you've always been a Trevor Rogers believer. You predicted the Orioles would trade for him last deadline.
I did.
Not for Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers, but
not because I believed in him. Let's be clear. But because
you believed the Orioles believed in him.
I believe the Orioles believed in themselves, and I believe that there was that there would be a lot of interest in trying to make something like what has happened. I did not think that like 14 years of Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers would be the cost of like betting on yourself. Like that's basically
14 years.
Well, yeah. I mean, you think that like they're not going to get like they're going to reach 6 years of service time like in their 7th year as like full-time big leaguers. So
yeah, true.
You know, and I was going to try to make some kind of analogy of like betting a lot on yourself, but I don't think I was going to be able to do that. So thank you for saving me from that by making me do math. It just felt like this is a thing they were going to bet on. And like, I think I've said as we talked before, like depending on who the last person I talked to was, whether I believed that they could do this, like I know they were trying. I know there was a lot to do, but I think you can look at this pretty reasonably now and say that like, yeah, I was actually projecting forward last night. I was like, what if Trevor Rogers is the guy that gets the extension? If they're like, Trevor, we fixed you. Would you please pitch here for, would you sign for like 5 years, $90 million?
That'd be
something
crazy.
like that.
Yeah.
It would be crazy, but like,
who else are you going to give it to? I mean,
yeah, I mean, but not who else are you going to give it to, but like they fixed him. Like he probably has some kind of thing. Like, let's like what I can see them being like, let's keep him around now. And like how funny that would be with all these guys that people love and Trevor Rogers, who I'm sure they could grow to love if he does that about 50 more times. Like,
I'd say what other pitcher would you give it to? Because you don't feel great about Grayson Rodriguez. Obviously, right now, Zach Eflin is in the midst of some major struggles. They also, the nice thing about Trevor Rogers, we said this at the time, is he's got a lot of years of control left, and he's only 26.
Yeah. I mean, I would do it to Kyle Bradish like right now if you wanted to too.
Make sure the rehab goes okay.
Yeah, but you want to see him throw after the surgery.
Yeah,
but yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, I listen. I think there has been a rush to reevaluate that trade.
Yeah,
based off of last night's results, and I would caution against that. I think I don't know. I don't know why people try to judge things so quickly in a vacuum. I mean, and to John's point, I mean, yeah, it's great that the Orioles believed in themselves, believed in the process, believed that they could fix a pitcher. It took them a year to fix Trevor Rogers. I mean, we spent a year of that very treasured team control, watching the Orioles, well, not watching him, him in Florida fixing himself and getting that velo back, getting some of that slider back. I mean, that was valuable time that it cost the Orioles in that trade while Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers were doing some things. And, I just don't think we can discount that cost in the trade. So it's great that Trevor Rogers has put 2 good starts together. It's great that some of his metrics are looking up after a year, but it did take a year.
It did.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, sorry, 582 OPS for Kyle Stowers since May 20th.
yeah, which we kind of expected. He was on fire to start the year, and
yeah,
a little bit expecting a dip.
handsome pumpkin, but starting to look like a pumpkin nonetheless. And I think one of the big what ifs, like Kyle mentioned, Trevor Rogers not pitching until a month ago, May 24th, might be like one of the, if we're talking about like the what ifs of this Orioles season, like it's not going to be higher than like 5th or 6th, but as the rotation was kind of, struggling to stay above water, as Charlie Morton is just going out there and getting shelled, as the Kyle Gibson experience is happening, as Cade Povich is on again, off again, like, throwing 100 pitches in 3 1/3, like there was no option to have Trevor Rogers pitch because he got hurt while he was ramping up. There was no Chase McDermott option. The Brandon Young option wasn't really one they could do. And like, I don't think it would be interesting to find out whether they thought that this was like, he got ripe for the picking in May after doing the buildup and like getting more time to work on his body, or if they thought when they sent him home from Norfolk that the offseason work that he was doing before he got hurt was going to allow him to be an earlier option. Because 8 innings of shutout ball on like April 24th for the Orioles would have been like, it would have felt insane given what was actually happening in that period.
And I just remember you talked about, John, how everybody you talked to during the offseason had a different opinion as to where Trevor Rogers was at.
Yes.
I remember asking Mike Elias during winter meetings about Trevor Rogers because we weren't expecting him to make the rotation out of spring training, but just wanted to get a sense of where Elias was thinking his development was going. And basically Mike Elias was just lumping him in with everybody else. Was saying, well, I asked if he had a shot of making the rotation out of camp. He said, well, everybody that we, have on the 40-man roster has a shot. And I was thinking, oh no, this guy is at this point giving up. But
yeah, you want to like pluck the nice apple out of the barrel and show it to everybody. It's like, oh, look, this apple really shines.
I was expecting him to be like, we've seen a lot of growth from Trevor Rogers. We have hopes for him this year. And I just wasn't getting that, but maybe they should have.
Yeah. I think after the trade, there was a better understanding of the scale of the work that needed to be done.
Yeah.
And there is now, I think it's more than green shoots. It's like we're talking about like real stuff that's growing here. And granted, like Texas has already fired their hitting coach this year. Like they are a team of people who are not very good at hitting. They play in Texas and, but they have a roof and air conditioning and it was 100 degrees yesterday. So like, there are a lot of reasons why that could have happened. And like, I think everybody should be, hanging on to the side of the Trevor Rogers train, like looking at the side of the road, like where you can jump off, but like people are getting on it right now.
Yeah. Also, just one more thing. I think it's going to be fascinating to see how this trade ages because I want to see how Connor Norby develops in Miami because he was the top 100 prospect in this deal. I know Kyle Stowers is having maybe still an all-star season. I don't know if he's fallen out of all-star contention, but the Marlins have to have somebody. So maybe Kyle Stowers will be their all-star. But Connor Norby, he was hurt for the first couple months of the season. He can play second. He can play third. He can play the outfield. I want to see how he develops because I still think he has a ton of potential. All right, let's talk about the catchers, guys. Let's talk about the guys behind the dish. Unfortunately, the Orioles lost one of their hottest hitters less than a week ago. Adley Rutschman with an oblique strain. Interim manager Tony Mansolino said it is mild, but it's going to keep him out until after the All-Star break. That is a major bummer for a guy that was starting to turn his season around. And as the Orioles, we've said it a million times, as the Orioles go, Adley Rutschman goes. And then that was compounded by the fact that Maverick Handley had one of the weirdest collisions I think I've ever seen between a runner and a catcher behind the dish when he tried to catch a ball from Colton Cowser in the outfield and collided with the runner, left that game, and now is on the concussion IL. So what did the Orioles do? Well, they have Gary Sanchez as their primary catcher now, and they selected the contract of Chadwick Tromp. Guys, I know there is a portion of the fan base that is always clamoring to see the prospects, that is always clamoring to see Samuel Basallo. However, it's still not his time.
Yeah, it's not. And as you know, I've sort of advocated for aggressively promoting guys last year. I was I mean, John and I were
you
both
both
very
have done that.
disappointed about Jackson not being on the opening day. I wrote about when they sent Jackson down for the first time, thought that they should work through it. The Orioles were also a winning team at that time. I mean, Jackson's struggles were not costing them more than their other very bad second baseman. And this is a situation where if you bring Basayo up, you think that he's going to go through the same lumps. He's only played in about 6 AAA games. He's only started 16 games at catcher this year for Norfolk. Even though he's hitting with power very well, you just assume that he's going to go through some of the lumps that basically every high-level Orioles prospect has gone through on this roster. And I don't think if you're still kind of anticipating there is a little bit to chase here. I mean, you're 6.5 games out of the wild card, so I know the Orioles are pretty well out of it, which we're going to talk about. But as long as you're still trying to chase in the All-Star break, it seems pretty unfair to say, okay, hey, you're a top prospect. Here are these expectations. Here's also the expectations of you filling the void of our 2-time All-Star catcher. And I just think that's way too much for a 20-year-old who doesn't really have the requisite experience.
Yeah. And I think we should make it like maybe we're going to start doing bits on this podcast eventually and have like run. I mean, we do bits.
We've
we
got
do
the
bits.
blame
I think
pie.
a running segment needs to blame pie is tasty, as we'd like to say around here. I think that we might need to do like with something like Samuel Basayo, like being a catcher and the Orioles needing a catcher. And I think it is conventional wisdom to say like, where is he? But I think we need to do a segment like who is actually saying this?
Right. True.
Like what? Like where are we? Like who are we arguing against? Who? As I think something we're going to start doing. But I would say with Samuel Basayo too, Gary Sanchez is a fine like everyday catcher. He has 1,000 OPS since we got back from the injured list. I'm holding space in my mind for the fact that he was out for a month. He probably was truly hurt, and there was probably something that was happening that was impacting him. I'm fascinated to see what like that looks like every day. I think it's also not necessarily the best lineup fit for Samuel Basayo right now, because you're going to try. He'd probably be taking at bats away from Kobe Mayo in a weird way, because Ryan O'Hearn is the left-handed hitting first baseman. Like there needs to be a DH. There's not really an apparent left-handed DH. I think especially maybe if you're getting Tyler O'Neill back soonish, like Colton Cowser could be the left-handed hitting DH, but then you're just adding another right-handed hitting outfielder. Like it's not necessarily a good fit. So I guess you could have him kind of be the lefty DH, but you're really limiting when Kobe Mayo is going to play. And if the Orioles are choosing, I'm going to give 15 plate appearances a week to Kobe Mayo, or I'm going to give 10 to Samuel Basayo and 10 to Kobe Mayo. You're not doing a good thing for either of those players at that point. So I think it feels a little bit one of those, like it's Kobe Mayo's turn to get like the extended look right now. I'm doing all this playing time math in my head. I'm sure there's people I'm forgetting, but I think if Gary Sanchez is going to be playing regularly, which I don't think anybody, as long as he doesn't have like a 300 OPS like he did the first month of the season, like it's a lot better when it's 1,000. I don't think anybody's going to have a problem with that at that point.
Yeah. The only thing I was going to add is that if you keep Basayo in AAA, you're not giving up on him. If you bring him up and then, like you're saying, Mayo doesn't give at bats. I mean, Mayo has nothing more to gain by getting more AAA at bats. He needs major league at bats for the Orioles. Even if the goal is to just know what Kobe Mayo is, they got to find out what he is with major league at bats. That's the stage he's at. That's not the stage that Samuel Basayo is at.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting when you look long term, because Gary Sanchez is on a 1-year deal. Chadwick Trump is not a part of this team's long term future. Maverick Handley is not probably viewed by this team as a backup catcher in the big leagues. So I wonder for next year, I was kind of going into this year thinking would be nice if the Orioles knew what they had in Samuel Basayo, or knew that he was ready to contribute. I still think they believe he is going to be with this team for a long time. But I just wonder if they go into the offseason with only, let's say they call up Samuel Basayo on September 1st and they get 25 games of Samuel Basayo. If they feel like we've seen enough from this guy that we believe in a backup in a duo of Adley Rutschman and Samuel Basayo in 2026, or if they feel like they have to add another veteran to that mix.
Yeah, and you know, to be fair to the amorphous blob of people who want him up, he's around what Gunnar Henderson had in terms of plate appearances. Gunnar Henderson had 295 at AAA before he got called up.
Do we think that the Orioles will make Samuel Basayo play one game at every position before they call him up?
If the Norfolk lineup comes out and Basayo's playing second base, pre-write the stories. Like, get freshen those bad boys up because they're gonna be posted soon. But I think.
By the way, remember that one game Gunnar played at second base at the end of the 2022 season? He made like 3 elite plays.
Yeah,
he was an elite second baseman.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's what I think that is where the, you know, I think another distinction that is always tricky with catchers. It is there are infielders who can't play their positions, and like it gets to be weird because it's very apparent. Like Ryan Mountcastle was made a first baseman on purpose and for good reasons. Like Kobe Mayo is now, that's not to say that he can never play third base, but he was never going to play third base here unless something terrible has happened.
For an extended amount of time.
And we had a few terrible instances here where like he needed to play third base, and now it's like, all right, go play first. But like catcher is one of those weird things where, you know, you'll remember like the Chance Sisco saga, and like all anybody could say was that he was getting better at catcher. And God knows that was probably true.
Yeah.
And there's things you could be working on constantly. I remember towards the end of the season last year in Bowie, like Basayo was there and he wasn't in the lineup that day at catcher, but he was just doing catching drills for like a half an hour. Like you are working at that. You can work at that. You can get better at it, but it's the type of thing. It's just, I think it's a higher bar. Like Jackson Holliday was a potentially elite middle infielder who was learning a new position, but I don't think it was super different than what he was doing. And you could trust that he would do it well enough. Gunnar Henderson was really good all over the infield at AAA, even first base when they needed to. And you knew that you would be okay there. I think there's going to be a time when you do want him to taste what being a big league catcher is like, and catching these games and working with the staff and the stakes. And I'm not sure that's right now, but if it's August 1st and you know, there's been a thank you Ryan O'Hearn social media post and Samuel Basayo comes up with a contract extension, like people will be a little upset, but I think that might be a little more of a realistic, like fun thing
with a contract extension. Wow. All right. Throwing that out there. All right. Let's talk about the deadline, guys, because you just teased a potential Ryan O'Hearn trade.
Pro.
He is
PRO. Pro.
He is the image in our thumbnail. So we can start our discussion there. But guys, right now the Orioles are 34-44. They're 6.5 games out of first place. As nice as the wins are when they pick them up, they are almost always undone immediately by a devastating loss. And being 10 games under 500 in mid-April is one thing. Being 10 games under 500 on June 24th is another. And to get to the place where they can convince Mike Elias and the front office that they need to add pieces or at least not deal pieces would require the best month that they've ever had. It's doable to get to that place over the course of the next 5 weeks, but their current stretch, I said a week ago, the second chunk of the season would have to be as good as the first chunk of the season was bad. And it's been fine. It's been better than the first chunk of the season. The Tony Mansolino era is going better so far than the Brandon Hyde era did at the beginning of the year, but it's not markedly better. And it's not to the point that they need to have it if they are going to compete in the playoffs, compete for a playoff spot. And that's why, to me, I'm looking more on the sell/stand pat side. How do you guys feel?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure John's going to get to it, but I mean, we know what this front office does. They are consistently on the sell side of they certainly. I mean, again, yeah. If the team is close to this sort of winning percentage, I mean, we know they're going to be in the sell side. I mean, even if they were 500 around the deadline, I think there's a chance that they would be on the sell side. I think this is a front office that is more comfortable when it's time to sell, more comfortable flipping pieces. I think of that 2022 team when they flipped Trey Mancini and Jorge Lopez, and it was painful at the time because it felt like they had a window, but the front office felt it was too early, and they did some deals, and it worked out pretty well. So I don't know. I mean, it's opinion almost seems besides the point at this point. We know what this front office does. We know what Mike Elias does. We know the positioning they take. They're far more comfortable selling than buying.
John?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that we didn't do this last week because it took, not the Orioles did anything good or bad. I think they had 3 like win of the year candidates and 3 loss of the year candidates in their last 6 games. So like that's kind of where we're at anyways. You're not going to glean too much by how they're doing, but I think we're like a month into them playing better baseball than they have. They are in a pretty, I don't want to say unique position because this is like among the more obvious things to ever come out of anybody's mouth. But like when their starters pitch well, they typically win. And when they don't, lose. Like the last time they won a game when their starter allowed 4 runs was Dean Kramer the first weekend of the season in Toronto. It's pretty automatic at this point. If the starter gives up 4 runs, they lose. So you look at this team now and like what they're going to be and what they could be. And I don't want to say I reject like the premise of like how close they can get to 500 because that feels like, I know there is a Tony Manzolino even said it last week. He's like, they understand the calendar. The players understand the calendar. Everyone kind of understands there's this goal of trying to get back into this as quickly as possible because you want to keep things together. And I think where I've kind of arrived at it is that it doesn't matter one way or the other. And that's not to say that like they're going to sell either way. It's that I don't think there's a world where they're doing any like meaningful buying, but if this team gets better, it's going to be because they have like a lot of good players and there's like positive regression coming and there's people coming back from injuries and all those things are going to be really simple to kind of envision. But there are just components of this that don't really have anything to do with whether they're playing well or not. There's probably going to be a time in August when they have more major league caliber starting pitchers and they know what to do with. And that's going to be true whether they're 3 games under 500, 23 games under 500, 10, wherever they are, that is going to be true. And the only time you can do anything about that is at the trade deadline. They're not going to, I don't think they're going to set the market. I don't think they're going to be like, we got to get ahead of this and trade Zach Eflin. I don't think if there's 3 more like Charlie Morton gems, they're going to be calling up GMs and be like, hey, we got this guy. His ERA was 10 2 months ago, but now it starts with a 4. Would you like him on your team before he has another bad start? Like, I don't think they're going to do that, but this is not a group that's going to pass up the opportunity to do the thing that is the most lucrative thing you could possibly do at the trade deadline, which is to trade starting pitchers. And I think that's something that is going to happen regardless. So I kind of wonder whether we're focusing on the wrong things.
The one thing I'll say is the one thing that the trade deadline could indicate to me is the tone in ownership. And so far, since David Rubenstein and Michael Arrighetti acquired this team, they've been sort of like, okay, Mike's our guy. We're going to go with Mike. He got the team this far. He got the franchise to where it is. He acquired all this talent. We trust in him, even though they didn't hire him. To me, Cal Ripken did say something the other week that was a little interesting. If you're still in it, if you're around 500 by the deadline, I say go for it. The way the wild card is, obviously Cal is not a major owner in that group, but I'm just interested to see if there's any urgency in the ownership group of, the attendance is down. We're getting to a point where Birdland members have to renew and decide if they want to commit more money. Prices have gone up in the last year. There's some real uncomfortable dynamics with the economics of the Orioles, and you wonder if the team is maybe let's say 3 games under 500, or maybe they say, you know what, we have as much a shot as anyone if the AL East stays close. We're getting some starting pitchers back. Let's give it a go and see if we can't get some excitement in the team. I would think that's unlikely, sort of going off of what John just said, because we just haven't seen that in the front office. But if they do something different, or if they do sort of a both strategy, to me, it might reflect a change in the tone of ownership.
Yeah, I think, like you said off the top, though, Kyle, I still think the tendency of this front office is to, when you're close, sell. And you could look at what the Tigers did last year. They didn't trade Tarek Skubal, but they traded some of their veteran players, and they still were able to make not only the playoffs, but a postseason run. I don't think that's necessarily a strategy that too many teams could copy. And frankly, I think if Mike Elias is selling off pieces at the deadline, I don't think he's expecting them to make the playoffs still. I think there's a possibility because, like John said, that you're getting pieces back. You could be getting Bradish and Wells and maybe even Grayson, although who knows, and Adley back after the All-Star break, and maybe Mountcastle, and maybe there is a shot that you are able to trade off some pieces and still make the playoffs. That's not out of the realm of possibility. But to me, I'm looking at the overall health of this organization, and what has Mike Elias always talked about? It's building a sustainable product. It's building a pipeline that is continually flowing. And I'm looking at the farm system right now, and I'm seeing that they're 15th in Major League Baseball, and I don't see too many sure things right now, other than Samuel Basallo, who's considered a top 20 prospect by every outlet. You got Kobe May, who's still considered a prospect, who is a top 100 prospect. Outside of those guys, you've got some nice pitching prospects from the 2023 draft. You don't have as many sure things. And I'm not going to say that any deal that you make at the deadline, even if you trade O'Hearn or Mullins or Sugano or whoever, that you're going to get back a top 100 prospect, that you're going to get some sure thing, surefire prospect. But what you could do is the Orioles traded two guys in Mancini and Jorge Lopez in 2022. They got back some really nice pieces. I mean, they got back Cade Povich and Chase McDermott and Yennier Cano. Those guys ended up being big leaguers. So to me, I think Mike Elias is going to look at that. And I know some people might disagree with who cares about the farm system rankings. You want to try to win now. You have Gunnar, you have Adley, you have all these guys right now. Try to win now. But I think Mike Elias is going to look at this and say, we need to be adding to our farm system right now. We need to be adding depth, not thinning it out.
Yeah, I think there's, and we've talked about this as we were kind of talking about this on the buying side. I think on the buying side, if this team is getting close enough to like where you're like, oh wow, is this actually happening? Like, there's not going to be. You can always go out and get like a top end starting pitcher, but there's just not a lot of areas that you're like, oh, they're going to need this, especially not like at a time when you're going to be paying above the market to do so. I think it's worth clarifying that they really only had the choice to buy or sell in 2022. Every other year, I guess 2020, they kind of were, because everyone was kind of in it. Like, they were in the playoff chase until like the last week of the season, and they still ended up with the 5th pick in the draft. So like that just said a lot more about, I think, the circumstances of that season. And they also only had like Freddie Galvis to trade, I think, in that year. Was that the Freddie Galvis year?
No, that was 2021.
Okay.
They traded Tommy Malone and Richard Blyer that year in 2020, though.
They did. And Richard Blyer early too.
Yes. And Miguel Castro. They traded Blyer because I think the Marlins got hit with like a COVID outbreak.
Yeah.
And they traded Blyer because they were just looking for healthy bodies.
That's right. They traded all the relievers.
Crazy.
They traded all the relievers that year, actually. Yeah. They had Castro, Michael Givens.
COVID trade.
That was the day of our that was the day of our baby shower. So
where's Kevin
was
Smith?
Not working. It was really sad. That was such a bummer to deal with that. Not to deal with that. But I think what we're talking about is, I think this is all part of the same big conversation, because even in 2023, as they're like, one of the best stories in baseball, like there were, they would have, if they had their, if this was like Madden or like if this was the show, or this was like, smart, if they were doing this, not about like, this is what we got, let's win now. It's like, oh, let's look at trading some of these guys who are getting close, because that was the rhythm they'd gone into. And like, you can't do that. You can't trade Anthony Santander when you're like trying to beat the Rays and are like neck and neck in a division race. You can't do that type of stuff. But that is the type of stuff that like I think they would view as objectively smart to do. That is not something that is going to be acceptable to an ownership group that's paid a boatload of money to have a good team and has paid a lot of money for this team to be good. Now, I think there's a world where we kind of take it all at face value, and that like there's that ownership is like, okay, like this has gone terribly, and it's all just a bunch of bad things happening at once. And like, this is a good team. And like, if we need to take the hit and get a handful of prospects back and like solidify like the upper levels of our minors and have some more trade chips for, this time next year if we need to, and we will have people be mad at us and we'll take the hit on that. Like, we had a good plan and a good process and sound methods, and we can do that. But I think the conversation that we are all collectively having, if we separate out the pitching, which I think is probably going to be its own thing regardless because of the guys who are coming back, like, we're really talking about like the Cedric Mullins and Ryan O'Hearn part of this. And those are two very different things that are weird. Like, they're weird to talk about. The idea of trading Cedric Mullins is like, is tough. It's going to be tough for everyone to take, and people will be very upset about it. And that doesn't mean you don't do it, but it means more now than it did a couple of years ago, even though Trey Mancini meant a lot to people too. And like, I guess that, Dylan Bundy meant a lot of people to an extent. And before that it was Manny Machado and all those like really, really good players from that good era. But I'll always remember, I was kind of running down like those 2020 offseason trades. It's like I was like, nobody came to the ballpark anymore because it was Dylan Bundy's day. Like, nobody came to see the Orioles because Jonathan VR was on the team. And somebody was like, yeah, but like, they were kind of good. And like, the Orioles might win on the days that they did something good. And like, when they're not there, you can't, like, these things matter to people in a way that I think is hard to see as we're sitting here talking about the deadline. And I think we're talking about two players that can help the Orioles win. And like, that's kind of what people want at this point. So you strip out the value stuff, and like, that's a big part of this.
Yeah. The one thing that I think about, I mean, there was a point, or maybe there wasn't, maybe it was just a sort of the amorphous blob of people talking, where it was sort of like, would it make sense to extend Ryan O'Hearn because he was playing so well? The thing I like about him is just, you never get a sense that he's giving up. Even when the team was bad, Ryan O'Hearn was playing well. He might have been the only guy hitting well in some of those dog days of May. And I feel like there's something, if you're thinking about the 2026 team, because that's when this team is actually potentially going to contend again, I'd like that guy on that team. But I do go back to what John just mentioned, the Trey Mancini trade. If you're going to trade a guy like Trey Mancini, like, what chances Ryan O'Hearn have? And to, even though Cedric Mullins might be on that emotional level for some people, what chances Cedric Mullins have as in his 30s center fielder? And I think those things will happen. I think those conversations will happen. They will be tough. They will be emotional. It was tough saying goodbye to Anthony Santander this offseason, and that decision, even though Tyler O'Neill hasn't been what they wanted. I mean, Santander hasn't been setting the world on fire either, and he's been hurt. So I just think ultimately, if you take some of the emotion out of it, those decisions tend to be prudent by this front office. I know I've hammered them on some things, but on these particular emotionally fraught decisions, they have a pretty decent record of saying goodbye at the right time. And so even though you think like, man, it would be great to see a guy like Ryan O'Hearn in the clubhouse next year, a guy like Cedric, who's been here, gritted through the rebuild, in the clubhouse next year, it's also hard to say if the front office chooses to say goodbye and they choose to sell high on a guy like Ryan and choose to kind of move on from a guy like Cedric. They usually do it at the right time.
So what I would say also, though, is, both those guys are going to be impending free agents. There are going to be a lot of guys on this team right now that are impending free agents. Zach Eflin, Tomoyuki Sugano, bunch of relievers. And Kyle, when you were talking about the potential pressure that Mike Elias might feel from ownership, because this is a year where you might be losing a lot of revenue with ticket sales, with merchandise sales, with certainly the Orioles have taken a hit in a lot of ways. And this is a new ownership group that says they want to win. Mike Elias is going into this offseason, I think, not fighting for his job per se, but he has got to have the offseason of all off seasons. I mean, I don't think that's going to mean he's going to hand out a 8-year deal to a starting pitcher, but he is certainly going to. And he said that he wasn't aggressive enough in getting starting pitching. And he didn't do a good enough job in the offseason. I expect Mike Elias to go out and be much more aggressive this coming offseason, because I think he's going to feel that pressure from ownership. Whether a Tiger can truly change his stripes, we'll see. But you have both guys that in Mullins and O'Hearn that could be traded at the deadline and then be free agents again. And the Orioles have had a track record years, decades ago, where they have traded guys out for 2 months, then re-sign them in the offseason. And Mullins probably has less of a shot of this, I think, because he is going to be in his 30s and he's a center fielder. And that is, a position that declines once the athleticism goes. It's very difficult to find value in those guys. But maybe they say Ryan O'Hearn is a leader that we can't afford to not have on this team in 2026 and beyond. So maybe they deal Ryan O'Hearn and they say to him, hey, we just traded you to the Houston Astros for a couple prospects, but we keep your phone on in November because we're going to come calling. And to me, I think that Mike Elias, that's something where you can have your cake and eat it too. Do the thing that the Yankees did with Aroldis Chapman, trade him out, watch him win a World Series with another team, and then re-sign him. And that might be the best of both worlds.
Full Jack Flaherty, you're saying.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I felt contractually
Yes, the
obligated
Jack Flaherty.
to use Jack Flaherty as an example.
Yeah. It's been, the greatest day of the offseason wasn't, I guess there probably weren't any like true great days of the offseason for the Orioles, but the greatest day of the offseason was when he finally signed somewhere and he wasn't here.
That was the greatest day for you, John.
Yeah, for me. Yeah, I'm talking about my own personal perspective, as I am with most things. I am fascinated by all those things that we're talking about here too, because I think when we talk about this being like a big offseason for the Orioles, I also think there's a world where like they could look at this as more like the 2023 winter, where like, yes, they went out and traded for Corbin Burns, and that wasn't explicitly because Kyle Bradish's elbow got hurt in January, but the timing feels similar or feels convenient to make that connection. So
incredibly convenient.
I will not stop making that connection until somebody explicitly tells me otherwise. Personally,
I will encourage you to keep making that connection.
Yeah. And what I kind of felt at that point, and I think they probably felt a little bit too, was like, we can upgrade, but we are okay. Like there's going to be some bench roles and like bit part players that are going to not be here anymore. And even if with pending free agents, like the Orioles are probably going to be able to look at their roster and like what they have come the beginning of November after free agency hits, and guys who walk and that type of stuff. And they're like, this feels pretty good. They're going to need to, I don't think anyone has the stomach for another offseason where they're not adding like a top level starter. Like, I'm not saying just do it so it could so we can stop talking about it, but that's kind of what I mean. like it's so self-defeating. Like I'm looking at it now, and like we're not talking about Tomoyuki Sugano being like, there's been a lot of outperformance there, like 3.5 ERA with like a run higher peripherals, but like Charlie Morton's xFIP is like 3.97 right now. Like that's not how baseball works. Like you don't get to the team with the best xFIP doesn't win the World Series, but like their process is probably going to look a lot better in a month than it did in April. And like, it'll look better in 2 months than it did in May. And I'm fascinated to see the level of like actual, I know they said they were going to do it and like everything was on the table and everything's getting evaluated, but it just feels like there's going to be, it feels like the team recovering in the way that it has, and any continuation of that is going to be more empowering for them to kind of keep their plans and their processes and their values, which include trading guys before they reach free agency and getting, 2 and 3 guys who you can have on your team for 6 and 7 years, because that's like the good business that they like to try to do. Like those things feel like the farther April and May get from us, those are the types of things they're going to feel more emboldened to do if things go well. And that's going to be what's fascinating.
I'd make 2 arguments against that. I mean, I think like that model makes sense when it's a zero sum wins and losses. Like you're like, okay, like what's our record in July? versus what's our record in May, and like maybe that strengthens. But again, the hole they've dug for themselves has real value, especially when it comes to the economic side of the club and the interest and attendance that's been lost. So, the losses in April are more impactful than the wins in July if this team doesn't make the playoffs. Second, I think I'm really interested to see, if the process stays the same and they look at the starting pitching market this offseason and they're like, you know what, it's too high. The premiums are too high. Guess what? They're always high for great starting pitching. You always have to pay a lot for great starting pitching. I think that it's going to be harder if you swing and miss doing the same strategy than if you sign a guy and he flames out. I think taking a different kind of risk and failing is going to be less punitive than doing the same strategy and failing again. Even same strategy and like marginal improvement. I think that's a really tough road to go down. And I think certainly for the fans that they want to see, even if there is a failure on a starting pitching gamble, they want to see something different. And I wonder if ownership will change its tune based on some of the ground that's been lost in the fan base this year.
Yeah, I think when you look at the Cubs, what the Cubs did last year as well, of a team that maybe got a jump start on planning for the following year. Last year at the 2024 trade deadline, they're 6 games under 500. And I think they viewed that as kind of a precursor for their offseason. So they acquired Isaac Paredes, who had more years of control. They kind of bought and sold at the same time, but basically what they were doing is trying to get more guys under team control beyond the current season. And when you look at what the Orioles could do, I mean, if you're talking about trading away Cedric Mullins, Ryan O'Hearn, all these guys we just mentioned, this is not an organization right now that is going to, this is not a fan base that's going to be placated. Not like Michael Elias should do anything for the fan base, like we've said, but this is not an organization that necessarily benefits that much from getting lower level minor leaguers. I'm sure if the guy pops on their model and they really liked him, they'll try to get one of those guys, but maybe some upper level minor leaguers, maybe some big leaguers. I mean, if you're trading O'Hearn, Mullins, you could get some big leaguers with years of control left. I mean, the Yennier Cano addition in the Jorge Lopez trade was a guy who had already made his big league debut and ended up being one of the better pieces in that deal. So I think that what they could do is maybe a little buying, maybe a little selling, where they are trading out big league players, but they're trading guys on expiring deals and getting back more years of control from younger guys that maybe they think can fill into their roster.
Yeah, and like the areas of need truly in the farm system are like those like upper level. I don't want to say depth because that's kind of not what you're trying to get, like good players.
You're trying to get big leaguers.
You're trying to get big leaguers, but like on the upper level hitting side is the thinnest of all of the groups,
which is crazy to say because where they were 2-3 years ago.
Yes, and I think there are worlds where Jackson Holliday was drafted in 2022, and he's their leadoff hitter in the big leagues, and the 2 players that were drafted right after him, Dylan Beavers and Judd Fabian, are playing well at AAA. So like how, like, yes, there can be more, and like how many more do you want? I think, I think some of the areas of need are in that area because the pitching has taken the steps forward it has, and like you can basically like play whack-a-mole and be like, okay, this is the guy today that's going, you can project being in the rotation in 18 months, and then they won't be, and then because then they get hurt. But and then there's also a lot of players on the international side who are kind of filling out the lineups in the low minors that are very, very interesting and people like a lot, and you want to give space for that to develop. But I think one of the concerns with all the moves the Orioles made in the calendar year 2024 to chase what was a very good chance at winning a playoff game, let alone like winning a playoff series or 2 or getting to the World Series, was that they traded a lot of their upper minors hitting cushion, and you can feel that now, and that's why we're seeing some of the up and down types of guys who are minor league free agents that are happening right now. So that's an area they could easily look to add, and you're not going to get super excited about those guys coming in maybe, but they can still help a lot.
Yeah, those are guys that could be, depth pieces on your roster going forward. And yes, the Orioles have suffered a calamity of injuries so far this year, but certainly there may be some areas where they could have improved their depth. I mean, obviously the starting rotation is one big one, but there are some, and this roster is going to get thinned out by free agency regardless in the offseason. Regardless of whether they trade these impending free agents, they're going to have to sign guys to replace these guys if they don't bring them back. So that's one area that I think the Orioles should really consider.
Yeah.
All right. We are going to wrap up the pod on the other side, but let's get another quick word from our sponsor.
For the 5th year in a row, Toyota is the best resale value brand according to Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com, including the 2025 Grand Highlander, best in resale value for midsize SUVs. Toyota, let's go places.
All right. Usually on this show, we end with a minor league check-in, but we would be remiss if we did not talk about the tragic passing of Orioles minor leaguer Luis Guevara, 19 years old, passed away in a personal watercraft accident in Sarasota last week. He was signed as an international free agent out of Venezuela in 2023, played in the Dominican Summer League in 2023 and 24. So far this year, he had been moved between levels, reaching Double-A Chesapeake for a stint as well. It's a tragic incident. An investigation into the incident remains ongoing, according to the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. There's a lot more to this, which we have coverage of on the BaltimoreBanner.com. Andy Kuska and Danielle Allentuck have a story delving into the incident itself, and Liana Holder wrote a great story yesterday talking to some of Guevara's teammates and friends about who he was as a young man and as a player on the baseball diamond. So stay tuned for more coverage as well as we cover this tragic passing of a 19-year-old minor leaguer. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me here on the Banner Baseball Show. At John Meoli is his handle. At Kyle Goon is his. Both of them writing great stuff for the BaltimoreBanner.com, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months. And of course, get John's newsletter, Inside the Dugout. Be back at the ballpark for another scorcher today. Hope you guys are loaded up on deodorant, wearing dark colors so that we don't see any sweat stains, as Kevin Brown and Jim Palmer said on the broadcast.
You almost landed this plane. You almost did.
2 for 2 on my part.
Yeah, you're doing great, John.
I put on deodorant and I'm wearing a black shirt.
Doing great.
We'll see how it goes for me.
Yeah, we'll if you
as ever, I'm trying to be a counterpoint to John.
If you catch Kyle at the ballpark, you'll notice him by his sweat stains.
I'm gonna be so sweaty. So bad.
Thanks so much for tuning in. For John Meoli and Kyle Goon, I'm Paul Mancano. We'll be back with another episode next